bring you back in, and you're going to be talking to us about escalation effectively in the Middle East. What are you seeing?
So yeah, I mean, we're still seeing escalation in the region, albeit it's we haven't yet had the response from the resistance factions, of course, led by Iran. But we've seen a lot of movement from the United States to, of course, bolster its defenses for its partner in crime in Israel. So Defense Minister Austin orders additional naval assets to the Middle East amid rising tensions. He's ordered additional naval assets, which include the USS Georgia submarine, and he's told the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is an aircraft carrier strike group, to get a move on. Basically, if we have a look at the text of the article itself, that basically confirms what I've said. The order came following a phone call on Sunday. So Sunday, the day that they bombed the school in Gaza and massacred 100 civilians and injuring terribly 200 others. So a conversation between Austin and the Israeli Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant. Austin reiterated the US commitment to taking every possible step to defend Israel, not to keep peace in the region, exactly the same situation as in Ukraine. Noted the strengthening of US military force posture and capabilities throughout the Middle East in light of hostile regional tensions. Again, I have to remark that it's quite incredible the pressure that is being put on Iran to back down, and yet absolutely no pressure on Israel. In fact, there is total endorsement of Israel's crimes in carrying out its aggression against Beirut and against Tehran. We're living in extraordinary times. So let's have a look again at the US naval hardware that is already in the region. Again, Brian, you might know better than I, but I don't remember seeing such a deployment of US naval battalions and of course allied battalions for a foreign entity, for a foreign nation.
Well, I'll just say, Vanessa, that yes, it is unusual for two carrier groups to be brought in relatively close proximity to each other. So these are massive forces. And to put a scale to it for our viewers and listeners, one of these aircraft carriers virtually carrying more aircraft than the average national air force of many countries. So these are immensely powerful assets. And of course, they've got the group of ships with them to provide air and missile defense to the carrier. But the other thing I'm going to say is the reality is, however, that even these units do not have any defense against the latest Russian hypersonic missiles. So there's a game of Russian roulette. A pun, I know, but I've used the expression underway here, because at the end of the day, should Russia decide to use its latest weapons, then even these American carrier groups are vulnerable.
Yeah, and let's remember that even Ansarullah, even the Yemeni forces, managed to actually strike, was at the Theodore Roosevelt. So, I mean, none of them are impervious to the resistance missiles, including Iran's developed ballistic and cruise missiles, and even potentially Yemen, Iraq, etc. But let's have a look what else the US is providing to what is effectively declared a genocidal entity. So 3.5 billion more in immediate military aid to Israel amid the war in Gaza. But also in the last 24 hours, America has pledged a further 20 billion. I think it's around 5 arms packages to Israel. So again, extraordinary funding and sponsorship of this ethno-supremacist entity. Then let's have a look at an opinion piece in Haaretz, which again, it's Israeli-based media. Netanyahu wants a world war. So what is the author saying? Let's have a look. He's basically saying So he's talking about the fact that in April, Netanyahu had orchestrated a situation where the US was mobilized alongside its World War II allies, France and Britain, together with moderate Sunni states, which of course include Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, etc., into a coalition defending Israel. So this was when Israel had targeted the Iranian consulate in Damascus. This is Netanyahu's dream come true, the world in an uproar with Israel at the epicenter. And I do think that this sort of bleeds into many more issues that we're looking at. The results of Haniyeh's assassination in Tehran are even more impressive as far as Netanyahu is concerned. Biden sent a force to the region that dwarfs the contingent sent in April. Netanyahu is setting the agenda. The world is breaking up around him. His actions are keeping Vladimir Putin, too, from his slumber. He's more relevant than ever on the global stage, and Netanyahu prevents the end of the war in Gaza in order to ignite a world war. In his megalomaniac hallucinations, this world war, the victory of civilization over the barbarians, shall be his legacy. And of course, where I would comment here is if Netanyahu were to leave tomorrow, actually this agenda would continue. It might take a slightly different shape, it might take a slightly different optic, but the dominance of the far-right extremism and Netanyahu's type of expansionism and revisionist Zionism is an ideology held by the majority of Israelis. And in fact, if we look at the next video, which is of the chief of one of the settler unions, I guess you'd call it, Daniela Weiss, who's been operating alongside the various Zionist governments since the 1970s, where she partnered Ariel Sharon to effectively ensure that the settlements stole as much Palestinian territory as possible. We've played a video with her in it before, so I've included just a few seconds of the original video we played and a recent TV interview where she talks about the fact that the settlers will be in Gaza. In other words, it's going to be a copy-paste of what happened in the West Bank will then be carried out in Gaza.
This land was promised to the Jews by God.
אז לאן זה הולך לדעתך האירוע שלנו ברצועת עזה?
לאן זה הולך?
כן.
לדעתי, תוך פחות משנה, יהיו אזרחים יושבים בעזה.
למה את חושבת?
מכיוון שיש לי איזושהי תחושה של הריתמוס ההיסטורי, ברגע שראש הממשלה נתניהו אמר שתהיה נוכחות צבאית ממושכת, אמרתי זהו, ככה זו הזמנה למחול. והוא עשה לנו ממש הזמנה למחול. אני נשאר, ואתם תשתמשו בניסיון, אני קוראת לזה העתק הדבק. מה שעשינו ביהודה ושומרון, וגם
אבל מה יהיה עם כל הערבים?
And we've mentioned the fact that, in fact, Netanyahu is doing nothing to bring back the hostages. We know now that Hamas, under the leadership of Yahya Sinwar, has actually pulled out of the negotiations on Thursday, saying that Netanyahu, instead of agreeing to the agreement that was set by Biden on the 2nd of July, he's introduced new measures that he knows perfectly well Hamas are going to refuse, which means that the ceasefire agreement will be delayed yet again. I mean, this is what has been going on since October the 7th, and that Netanyahu and the Zionist forces can continue their ethnic cleansing in the whole of Palestine. The next video, again, I just want to bring in Alastair Crooke, former diplomat, who goes on interview with Judge Napolitano every Monday, and it's well worth watching because I think his analysis of the region is among the best. And here he's talking about why he believes a regional war is inevitable.
Fair to say, Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire and does not want a deal to return the hostages. He wants a wider war against Iran.
That's obvious, yeah, quite clear. He's made that absolutely apparent. There's not a single doubt about that amongst Israelis. He wants a full war, and he wants to provoke it, and that's why the great danger is, as I say, not just what Iran does in whenever it does it in this next period, but might be much more threatening than people expect. I know the sort of myth of Israeli military greatness is pervasive, but it may be much more serious than they expect. And then they will react. And what will they do to provoke it to the next level where America is fully engaged? Use a tactical nuclear weapon? That's been threatened by Israel, something like that. Well, that will certainly take us to a different level. Where will it leave Russia and China? I mean, this is why I say it seems to me almost inevitable, because there's no one actually pulling back, actually.
And then finally, I just want to play a video from 2019 with Syed Mohammed Marandi, a professor in Tehran University. I'm sure everybody knows him. He's a regular guest on the BBC and Channel 4, pushing back against their propaganda. But here he talks about what will happen in the case of a regional escalation, what will happen to the Persian Gulf, and what will happen to the oil installations there, and how that will disastrously impact upon particularly Western economy. And of course, that's a repeat of the Ukraine playbook and the Nord Stream sabotage.
They cannot win a war in the Persian Gulf. Anyone who looks at the map knows that from the northern tip to the southern tip of the Persian Gulf, Iran has a strong presence. And it is a small gulf or waterway, the Persian Gulf. The oil and gas facilities are impossible to protect. If there is war, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would be a sideshow. That would be nothing in comparison to the complete and utter destruction of all the oil and gas facilities in the Persian Gulf, as well as all the tankers.
Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for that section. Many people saying we're moving very quickly towards World War III. Isn't that an incredible statement? But for me, what is really incredible is we are not seeing a clamor of politicians throughout the world to wind back on this violence, both in Ukraine and the Middle East, in order to get the world back on a stable, peaceful footing. We seem to have people that want nothing but war. And what is so terribly sad, I think, for the US is that the wealth of America, a great nation, is simply being poured into weapons and munitions on the battlefield with no clear-cut idea of what the result is going to be of the use of those weapons. So I think there needs to be massive reflection by the voting public in the West, and certainly our politicians need to be held to account as to what's happening at the moment.